Okay, welcome back. We're going into a session now, a very light session on global perspectives. Um, we have looked at the Great Commission. We all understand the importance of it, but now we want to look a little bit at how the Lord has been doing this. How has God been moving through the world through the centuries? You could say it might touch extremely lightly on a little bit of church history. You don't need to take down a lot of notes. That's not the intention of this this session. The purpose of the session is for you to see that you are a part of something that has been coming for a very long time. It's something that's beautiful, something that God has started long, long ago. That's the purpose. And then to look at how current things in the world and trends affect the way we do missions. There are hundreds of thousands of missionaries around the world who believe Scripture compels them to spread Christianity to others. And we have determined that that is the Great Commission. But what's changing is where they are coming from, where they are going, and why. To start, we're going to go all the way back to Christ's crucifixion. And this is the part where I want you to see what you're a part of and how long it's been coming. After Christ's crucifixion, the gospel started to spread amongst the Jews first on the day of Pentecost. So after Christ's crucifixion, the gospel started to spread amongst the Jews first. On the day of Pentecost, in Acts 2 verse 5, it says, God-fearing Jews from every nation were there. The movement of the gospel was entirely a Jewish community. Stephen, he must have realized that the gospel to stay only amongst the Jewish community. In Acts 6:14, Stephen was accused of saying the same as Jesus, that the customs of Moses were going to change, the way that the law was looked at. Jesus says in John 4:23, he says, yet a time is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. Stephen was stoned to death because of this. And persecution now started to break out. Jewish Christians started to flee for their lives. The temple, remember this is what Stephen was realizing, the temple now ceased to be the focal point of worship. With this scattering of the Jews, Christians still believed, though, that Jesus, that he was Jewish property, only telling Jews the gospel. And you know, we see that in South Africa today, that mentality, that the gospel is only for a certain type of people or a certain tribe, and we will not go preach the gospel to those people or to those people or to that tribe or that culture. We see that same type of mentality today. But Acts 11:19 says that some started to speak to Greeks also. And that was the turning point. We started to see how the gospel started to move now out from the Jews. God orchestrated a dramatic change. To follow Christ, the Gentiles would no longer have to become Jewish in their cultural ways. This is important for a missionary to understand. The council in Jerusalem, which was Acts 15, was where this was resolved, as many Gentiles were coming to the faith. And a lot of the Jewish people said, but they must be circumcised, and they must now conform to our cultural ways. And it was Paul and Barnabas that said, no, that's not how it works. And at the council of Jerusalem, that whole issue was resolved. These cultural issues needed to be sorted out first before the Great Commission could commence properly to all the nations. At the end of the book of Acts, the story does not end, and the gospel continues to grow and continues to spread. Paul, Barnabas, Timothy, Titus, but to name a few who continue to labor and work hard for the spreading of the gospel. God continued to raise up and call ordinary people to continue the mandate of the Great Commission. What type of people? Ordinary people, normal people, ordinary people. Constantine identified as a Christian in AD 112. And by AD 375, Christianity had been made the official religion of Rome. The Romans would invade the barbarians of the north, and so the gospel spread through traveling evangelists like a man by the name of Barnabas. God called a young man named Marwan Sukkot, who changed his name and who ended up planting over 700 churches in Ireland and Europe. You know, St. Patrick's Day? Dan gaan stapel klomp mense in die strate, né? You know, it's actually a day to honor the missionary St. Patrick. Who knew that? Who just learned that now? Wow. He planted over 700 churches in that time, about 8,700. Into the Vikings. There was absolutely no Christian influence amongst them at that stage. They were merciless. They attacked, they raped, they pillaged. They especially enjoyed destroying churches while the people were still inside busy worshiping and having services. And they would sell the monks into slavery. But God. Over time, the Viking conquerors would be conquered by the gospel that their captives had. Isn't that beautiful? From 1,200 to 1,600 after the death of Christ, it's a period of the Crusades, which brought a lot of, when we look back at it today, a lot of shame upon the Christian faith. The Crusades resulted in Muslim doctrine becoming more anti-Christian. Yet in the same time, amazing work was done by friars. Remember Robin Hood? And there's that guy, Friar Tuck. Okay, a friar. Not that I think Friar Tuck was the best example because he was a drinking friar. But friars were faithful in carrying the gospel forward. A popular name of this time would have been Francis of Assisi, who focused on loving evangelism in a time where a lot of people were killing you if you were not a Christian. Francis of Assisi focused on loving evangelism. Martin Luther was a priest who died in 1546. He rejected several teachings and practices of the Roman Catholic Church. He taught that salvation was a free gift of God and not earned by works. He translated the Bible into German, and because of his influence, it was translated into English, which is the Tyndale version. He stands in history as the father of Protestantism. In 1722, Nicholas Zinzendorf formed the Protestant missionary movement called the Moravians. They baptized over 13,000 converts over 50 years amongst the slaves of the West Indies and planted many churches on the islands of Jamaica, Barbados, and more. They were in the Arctic, they were in North America, they were in China, they were in India, they were in Persia. Now, I just want you to think, how was missions done back then? You don't need to answer me. I want you to think about it. They couldn't climb on a plane. They never had cell phones. They never had emails. They never had the maps that we have today. But these guys, the Moravians, were doing a phenomenal, huge work. Our brothers and sisters of yesteryears. The Moravians went to the most remote and neglected and dangerous areas. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So the Moravians went to the most remote and neglected and dangerous areas. This was new to global missions. Also, the fact that they would take whole communities, they would take their whole families. Singles would go, married couples would go, all on a mission to expand the gospel. The 19th century dawned, and the 19th century is referred to by Dr. Peter Hammond as the greatest century of missions. He wrote a phenomenal book called The Greatest Century of Missions. Of the many faithful missionaries of that time, and there were many, I'd like to name but a few. Henry Martin, he went to India and he went to Persia. Now listen to this, a funny story if you read his life story, is that there was this girl that he was wooing. Who's never heard that word before? Wooing. I thought a chaff, okay? And he wrote a letter from the mission field to her to ask her to get engaged. It took 6 months to get to her. Then she replied, and it took 6 months to get back to him. And she said no. Well, WhatsApp would have been a lot easier. William Carey went to India. Hudson Taylor went to China. You know, it's interesting. When he got into China, there were these civil wars taking place. I think it was the Boxer Revolution. People were being massacred on the streets. When he landed as a missionary in a foreign country, foreign culture, people were lying around him dead. Immediately, he put on foreign clothing, the same type of clothing that the people would wear in China, and that's how he remained for the rest of his mission. Phenomenal. Robert Moffat. When we drove through Crusades yesterday, I said to Matthew, look, the Robert Moffat Museum. If you go inside there, the preekstoel, the pulpit of Robert Moffat, where he preached from, is inside that little museum. It's the only interesting thing inside there, but it is there. Robert Moffat was in this area. He influenced the life of David Livingstone. David Livingstone married his daughter. C.T. Studd went to China. He went to India. He went to Africa. You know, he was in China 15 years, C.T. Studd. He was in India 6 years. And then he came to the jungles of Africa for 21 years. C.T. Studd was a cricket player for England. He grew up in a wealthy family. His father was stinking rich. There are photographs of C.T. Studd's house when he was a young man, a young boy. And then you see the photograph of the house that he died in. It was a little handmade mud hut in the jungles of Central Africa. They say that when he was ill in his last couple of years, last couple of days, that 5,000 people gathered around his hut. 5,000. And they were singing hymns that he had taught them. That's how he was escorted into heaven. Isn't that beautiful? He gave up everything for the sake of the gospel. Went to numerous cultures for multiple years to be faithful to Jesus. And then Dr. David Livingstone. Dr. David Livingstone, whose life we will look at tomorrow in our last session, who came to Africa. Guys, missions is changing. And it's continuously changing. And we as missionaries and as Christians need to be queued up. We need to be informed. We need to change and adapt so that we can do missions better. The world has become smaller by fast travel, by radio, by television, by cell phones. With this changing world comes many opportunities. I want to tell you a story. I was in Uganda. We started working amongst the pygmy people in the central jungles of Uganda. The pygmy people are the people that used to live in the forest with the silverback gorillas. And what happened was the governments came and they said, we're going to make this jungle area only for the gorillas. And the people who lived in the jungles, the pygmy people, were literally chased out by gunpoint. And now these are people who used to pick berries and live off the land. And the moment they got to the cities, they were exploited. And now amongst the pygmy people, you see alcohol, you see drugs, you see prostitution, you see extreme poverty. And we come there. You know, it takes us, listen to this, It takes us 4 days just to get to Kisoro, where we work with the pygmies jungle, just on the outskirts of the jungle. 4 days to get there. Then we're on the ground, and it takes 4 days to get back. And you know what? I complain about it. And I've got to remind myself about these men and women who were on the ships for 6 months to get to their destination. The pygmies are there, and by God's phenomenal grace, we have something called the Jesus Film. And I'm standing there and I ask the question, I say, but these pygmies understand your language that you speak here in the city. They say, yes. I say to them, what is the language that you speak? I type it in on this MacBook. I find the Jesus Film in their language. We go fetch those pygmies. We bring them into town, and many of them for the first time saw a computer. And then got to see the story of Jesus. They've never seen a movie, some of them. They've never seen something like that. In their own language, showing them the story of Christ's life. You see how things are changing compared to then? You see how easily I could use that was at my disposal. We need to be well informed in order to do missions well. You know, in 1970, there were 240,000 foreign Christian missionaries worldwide. Missionaries always coming from the West, from Europe, or coming from America. In 2000, the year 2000, there were 440,000 Christian missionaries worldwide. By 2013, we started to see a reverse trend of missions appearing. What do you think that was? A reverse trend. Younger churches in the South, meaning in Africa, South America, from Brazil, Nigeria, started sending missionaries north, back to Europe, where Christianity is now on a decline. Ain't that scary? How times are changing. We have seen churches become mosques in Istanbul. Wembley Central Mosque in northwest London used to be a church. Churches are being bought up by Muslims and are being made mosques. According to churchleadership.org, about 4,000 churches a year close in the USA. 80% of young adults in Estonia, in Sweden, and in the Netherlands categorize themselves as non-religious. 80% of your age, we're non-religious. We don't believe in anything. In the UK, only 7% of young adults identify as Anglican. Missionaries also no longer enter countries under the name of missionary. When I was in Pakistan, I met a missionary that was there, and on his passport, he had a visa that said missionary. I couldn't believe it. When you get a visa to go into Pakistan, mine had said tourist, and it said the Islamic State of Pakistan. He showed me his. It says the Islamic State of Pakistan missionary. Wow, I was so blown away by his boldness. He's like, yeah, I'm coming for mission work. Give me that on my visa. But now, how do we get them in? We get them in as teachers. You see, we've got to shift with the trend and with the times because many countries don't allow missionaries anymore in. So how do we get them in? Teachers. Teachers. We teach them how to teach English to children, and there are many Muslim schools and schools over there that are seeking well-spoken, sorry, you can't go Royus, well-spoken English people. Jy praat Afrikaans baie mooi, maar jou Engels is not going to get you far. Where the church in China, listen to this, where the church in China was only receiving missionaries, the church now sends missionaries from China. Ain't that amazing? I was in China, and I stood. First of all, we were snuck into a church in China, still an underground church. And the pastor, I was with an American guy, and this American guy had been working at that church for 20 years, smuggling Bibles in. And I witnessed one of the most beautiful moments I've ever seen in my life in the mission field, where the pastor came and he said, my dear brother, I want to give you a present. And he gave him Chinese Bibles printed in China. He said, you used to smuggle them in. we now print our own, and I want to give you one. He said, take it back to the Chinese people in your country. How beautiful is that? You see, times started to change. I've been in and we've shared the gospel in remote areas, so remote that I have to tell somebody, he has to translate it to another translator, who translates it to another translator, who tells the person. This is like musical chairs. I just hope and pray that the right story gets there. That's how remote and how many dialects of the language you find in a country with over 1 billion people. Today we see the Chinese Communist Party becoming threatened. Why are they becoming threatened? They are becoming threatened because of the spread of Christianity, but why? Many prominent Christian church leaders have been arrested now in recent years, and they've been sentenced to prison. Already there are 116 million Protestant Christians in China in 2020, and it's growing. God is doing a big thing in China. And when you compare that to only 90 million members of the Communist Party, do you see why they are stressed now? Do you understand why they're cracking down now? So there's another shift happening in China at the moment. Again, they are starting to close churches. If you have a house church in China, it is still illegal. If you do have a church and you register, they put cameras in your house, in your church, and see what you say, hear what you say. They want control. Times are changing. House churches registered are still banned and are closed by force and are burnt down often. China that still needs our prayer and our assistance, still needs missionaries to go there. In the 1800s, missionaries went to rural villages. This is important. Only 3% of the world's population lived in cities back then. Watch this. It's estimated that by 2030, 5 billion people will be living in cities. 5 billion. Times are changing. Urban evangelism and ministries need to be key in our approach going into the future. Where missionaries needed to travel to unreached people groups, they are now traveling to us. It's another change that we see. You can go into Groblershoop and will you find someone from Pakistan? From Somalia? I'm on my way to Malawi now. Half of Malawi's on this farm. You see what's happening? You see, with the change of travel and things like that, God's doing something. He's sending them to you, man. We can reach them in our cities right here. But are we? Are we? Are we? And I don't say that. I ask me, how many outreaches do I have in the center of Kimberley amongst all the Pakistanis? Not one. Not one. But I traveled to Pakistan. You see what I'm saying? We need to have a mind shift. So I don't point a finger. Yeah, when I prepare this stuff, I'm speaking to myself. We need to have a mind shift. Global events such as wars, natural disasters, politics, persecution, and even sport impact the church, its advancement, and the ways we do mission. And history has proven this. I can remember, when was the World Cup soccer? 2010. 2010. I was in the bus with Royers to Bloemfontein handing out newspapers in front of the stadium. Was jy saam gewees? Nee, ek dink jy was saam. Ek dink was net ek en Struis en Jonathan. Ek kan nie onthou dat jy daar was nie. Were you there? Well. But it was an event where we saw an opportunity. They saw the opportunity. I was blessed to be part of it. Where we had the world coming to us. Isn't that amazing? And they jumped on it, and I was fortunate to be part of it. The Arab Spring, when we saw the change on the political scene in Egypt, for example, Syria, the Arab Spring brought about the rise of ISIS. You're all familiar with that name? ISIS. And that led to the ethnic cleansing of Christians in Syria and Iraq. People being exterminated and wiped out like insects. Watch this. ISIS has spread to Mozambique, into the Cabo Delgado region. Children as young as 11 are being beheaded. 2,500 plus people have already died. This is right here. This is right here. Listen to this. Will violence spread in this region? A growing concern is that violence in the Cabo Delgado area may spread to other parts of Mozambique and beyond. In fact, Open Doors noted armed groups already have reportedly crossed Mozambique's border into Tanzania and killed people there. In addition to Tanzania, Mozambique's border touches Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Eswatini, and South Africa. One ISIS militant group warned South Africa not to interfere in Mozambique politics, especially regarding ongoing Islamic insurgency in the country, according to Open Doors. Female Christians are especially at risk in Mozambique at the moment. Female Christians face rape, sexual harassment, abduction, becoming forced labor or objects for sex. They may also be forced to convert to Islam and marry a Muslim man. If already married, they were forced to divorce, lose custody of their children, and lose inheritance. That's what's happening right here. My question to you is, how can your church or ministry engage in that problem right now over there? Let me tell you what we're doing. I now have a group of American people coming to South Africa. We have that pastors' conference in Kimberley where some of you will be attending. We are then flying up to Malawi, where in Malawi we are going to train and mobilize the Malawian pastors who are closer to cross the border and serve and help the pastors in Mozambique. It's one small thing that we have thought of that we can do now. What that looks like, I don't know. Will we end up going with? I don't know. I don't know. But fact remains is that I cannot call the ministry Africa for Jesus, and when there's a genocide taking place right next to us, I'm not engaged. And I told our partners in America, you call your ministry called to Africa. But we have people who are being killed, churches being burnt, Christians being murdered, children of 11 years old who love Jesus being beheaded, and we are not engaged. We need to look at the world from this Christian perspective, be well informed, and make decisions and spend money accordingly. COVID-19. The impact of COVID-19 on the church. 4,500 churches closed in the USA in 2019. 3,000 opened. That's a 1,500 decline. That's just because of COVID. We're not even talking about the atheist group and the unbelief and the liberal left. We're talking about just what COVID is doing. According to a Gallup poll, 47% of Americans say they belong to a church. That's down from 70% in 2020. So in 2020, 70% of the people said in America, yeah, we belong to a church. This year, a year later, 47%. And that's a Gallup poll. That's scary. Reduced giving also impacts missions. I just told you that out of the 40-odd trillion within the Christian church, only 1% is reaching the mission field. With COVID, it's even less now because the church is getting less. COVID is impacting missions. That's why the next session, after this, we're going to talk about prayer, and then we're going to talk about the missionary and finance. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed missions. You know, you got to get a COVID test now to travel. When I went to Uganda, I had to get a COVID test in Kimberley. When I landed, they made me do another one. We landed at 12 o'clock the evening. I sat for 5 hours next to the lake, mosquitoes all around, doing another COVID test, waiting for the result. We were then on mission. Before I left, I had to take another one. So it cost me, 2,800 Rand plus minus just for the COVID test. That's out of the money I could have bought food with for the picnic people. You see how it's affecting? We now have to get vaccines. John MacArthur says a very nice thing concerning the vaccine, and I don't want to get into that debate, and I know each to his own on that one. All I want to say is this, and this was my conviction. John MacArthur said, if me not getting the vaccine is going to stop me from doing the gospel, then I'm getting the vaccine. Let me say it again. If me not getting it is going to prevent me from spreading the gospel, I'm going to get it. And that's where I was. I've taken the vaccine because I've said, listen, I'm not going to let this thing take the money from the purse. And I'm not going to let this thing stop me, because there are already countries that don't want you to go if you haven't been vaccinated. Doors are closing. Doors are closing for missionaries because of COVID. We have missionaries in South Africa doing phenomenal work, supporting congregations, planting churches, supporting those churches. And you know what? Our missionary friends in Kimberley have all gone home, and they can't get visas to come back. See how it's changing? We're going to need to stand on our own feet. Online activities have increased, though. That's one of the most beautiful things that have come out of the pandemic, is that all of a sudden we jumped onto the computer and we started teaching online and YouTube, and all of a sudden we were like forced into this place that is actually good. It was actually good that we could get geared up more technologically. Not all has been bad, therefore. So our work, in conclusion, is cut out for us. I want to say that work ethic in these last days of missions is going to be key. In Afrikaans, ek dink jy daar gaan plek wees vir lui mense nie in die sendingveld. I really don't think. I think there's a certain character and a certain tenacity, like we will see in the life of David Livingstone tomorrow. A certain character is going to be needed for the work that lies ahead. And that person, that individual, that man, that woman, their work ethic, the way that they do their work, the way that they are focused on this mission is going to be key. Holiness in a morally declining world and church is going to be key. While I was in Uganda, I read of a prominent pastor who all of us listened to his work, that he had affairs with ladies who used to massage him. And I stood there and I was like, no, man, it can't be. And then I started researching it, and then I saw, but at this church, this pastor ran away with a woman from his wife. And I read, at this church, this pastor's running away with another woman, leaving his wife. And I'm like, what's going on, man? We're going to need to be holy. Live holy. Heilig. Heilig. Heiligheid is what is needed for those who are about to engage in this great commission. We need to be informed and ready to adapt at any time. You know, when we flew into Uganda, I said to my partner, I said, Ken, I said, this is how I've prepared myself for this trip. I said, I don't know what lies ahead, but it's okay, I'm coming. I said, if they stop me and say I have COVID, then I'm going to have to quarantine. Then I cross that bridge. I say, if I'm cleared and I get to go, then I cross that bridge. If they want to arrest or whatever, I don't know. It's okay. We cross that bridge when we get there. But we need to be able to, and we need to be willing to adapt at any moment in these last days. Starting businesses and giving will be key. And I just want to use quick examples over here and then we close. Because the giving has been reduced because of COVID, for example, we as a ministry experience people giving less. So we started farming with chickens. 50% profit margin, folks. It's good money in chickens. Good money in chickens. We need to start doing things to make money. A young man sitting over here, Marvin Lee, he saw an opportunity. He's like, hey, I can take 2 tires and I can make a chair out of it with rope and 2 pieces of wood, 4 pieces of wood. He got an order yesterday for 3,000, I wasn't supposed to say, but a lot of money. And he sold some chairs. And that's how he's funding his mission. Because on his bank account, he's got a missions fund where he puts money into. Every cent that comes in, he has to put into the mission fund. And I check his phone. I check his Capitec accounts. People are doing things to make money to keep on going. And besides, God is still giving. In the middle of COVID, we got 100,000 Rand donation for mission work going forward. Phenomenal stuff. God is still doing that. En tog gee hy vir ons 'n brein. He gives us gifts.
He gives us opportunities. He blesses us with businesses and we don't look after it. He blesses us with businesses so that we can grow them. So that we can use it for His glory. It's my prayer that you understand that as we embark upon this great commission, that we will be well informed, that we will read the news, that we will pray differently, and that we will strategize differently. Thank you.